Merry Christmas. Well, little early. I realized I never posted my full podcast interview with Hoover, and I know you're going to love it. So that's what this is: 45 minutes of great conversation talking about his background, his start in the military, his favorite plane, what he thinks about Top Gun Maverick, um, why he started Pilot Debrief and how that has evolved, and maybe some thoughts on the future. And it's a great conversation. So you get to know Hoover in every way possible. So here you go. Merry Christmas to you all. Happy holidays. Hope you enjoy. Well, Hoover, thanks for joining today. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I love your channel. I'm a big fan. That's the whole reason I reached out to you. So I wanted to just start out, and first of all, I'm a layman. I am far from the aviation expert that you are. So I think that's why it's so enjoyable to so many people watching your YouTube channel that you have almost 800,000 followers on now.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you,
It's been growing pretty good.
yeah, can you give just a little elevator speech about your background? I know it, but I just want people to hear some of it from you.
Sure. I was born and raised in Florida. And then for college, I was accepted to the Air Force Academy. So very blessed for that opportunity. After graduating from the Air Force Academy, I had a pilot training slot. So I did that down in Texas, where I flew in standard, path and pilot training. You fly T-37, and then I got on the fighter bomber track. So I flew the T-38, and then was selected to go fly the F-15E Strike Eagle. And I did that in North Carolina. That was my first operational assignment with an operational combat squadron in the Air Force. Following that assignment, I was selected to participate in an exchange program with the Marine Corps, where I flew the F-18D Hornet. And then after 3 years of that, went right back to the F-15E Strike Eagle for another 3 years. So basically 9 years of operational assignments back to back to back. Took a short break for a few years through the Air Force to go do school and then staff assignments, things like that. And then finished my career flying the F-15E again back at Seymour Johnson, where it had all started. Retired from there. And then once I got out of the military, it was right when COVID was happening. So the airlines had put hiring on pause. So I ended up flying for a Part 135 carrier. So think of charter operations, private charter jets,
Yeah.
where I flew the Citation XL. And then now I fly for a major airline.
Now, what are of those planes that you mentioned? I know a couple of them are kind of training, planes, the T-37, T-38. At least that's how
Mhm.
I've heard you describe them before.
Right.
Of the other two, which is your favorite and why?
You always love your first. The Strike Eagle is always going to have a near and dear place in my heart. It honestly is one of the best aircraft that there is, in my opinion. I love flying it. It's a great mission, great opportunities, and flying that aircraft, and then it's got some great capabilities as well. The Hornet is also very fun to fly, though.
Yeah.
So it comes in as a close second place, only because it doesn't quite carry the amount of payload and fuel that the F-15E can carry.
So it has some limits as far as what you can do and from a mission standpoint, maybe.
Right. You just won't be flying, the missions you're flying won't be as long. The F-18 does have some other unique mission sets that it does because of how the Marine Corps integrates with the ground component of the Marines. But that the Air Force doesn't have, since the Air Force doesn't have a ground component. So there's some uniqueness in that regard to the F-18 that I really enjoyed as well. It makes it different, when it comes to the mission sets. But the Strike Eagle is, it's a phenomenal aircraft to fly, and I really enjoyed it.
Now, you trained at Miramar, right?
I did. So that was where the F-18 initial training was for me. And they've got training at a couple different bases, but that's one of the locations. And I ended up spending almost a year there for the training for the F-18 before I went back to the East Coast, down to South Carolina for the operational assignment there.
Now, Miramar has this like Top Gun, reputation, even though most people don't know that the actual Top Gun program moved out of California, I think in the mid 90s. Is that right?
Yeah, I can't remember when,
Yeah.
but they did move out a while ago. So
Yeah.
it's no longer there anymore.
So what was Miramar like when you were there? I mean, was it a great place to train as a pilot? You know what I mean? Did you feel like you were at the epicenter of, one of the few bases for future fighter pilots?
I mean, it's a great base. The location is can be challenging because of its proximity to San Diego. In terms of like the airspace that you have to work in, you do a lot of work over the Pacific. So you head out over the waters there. But you're also within a close enough range to some airspace they have kind of out to the east, over the desert, essentially, and some of the less densely populated parts of California.
Yeah.
So it is a great place. They do have a couple of squadrons out there, and I don't know how much it's changed since the last time I was there was, gosh, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago almost. But we really enjoyed, my wife and I really enjoyed our time there.
Now, what does it take to get carrier qualified? Because I saw that you were qualified for that, and that is
Mhm.
not a typical qualification. Is that right?
Well, not for an Air Force guy. For somebody going through the Navy Marine Corps, that is pretty typical. And the Navy Marine Corps, the pilots when they go through their initial pilot training, like down in Pensacola or wherever they go to do
Yeah.
their training, they're gonna get some exposure to the carrier, where they're gonna go out there and do some stuff there, and then with transitioning to the F-18, they've at least already seen it one time. For an Air Force guy, I didn't have that experience. And so, taking off and landing on a carrier for the very first time was in an F-18, for me, rather than in a small trainer aircraft. So that was very unique. The program to get you qualified for the carrier, piece of the training is pretty robust. It's about a month long where you're doing a lot of simulator events, but then also a lot of carrier landing practice, on the actual airfield where they'll have, a painted box essentially out on the runway, and they'll have, an LSO, a landing signal officer out there guiding the aircraft down just like you would on a carrier. So you get a lot of repetitions in there and a lot of practice doing that before you actually go out to the boat.
Now, one of the things that I love about your videos is that you go into detail about a pilot and their certifications and their test history and things like that. We'll talk about the channel in a minute, but can you describe the different types of certifications a commercial pilot can get from smaller planes on up to commercial, you know, major carriers?
Right. So most guys are going to start off in the general aviation community with their private pilot license. That's the very first thing that you're going to get. After that, typical progression would be, an instrument rating, and that allows you to fly in the weather. When you're out there flying around. Once you're through that stage, you've got your commercial certificate and your flight instructor certificates. Commercial allows you to essentially, be compensated for the flights that you're doing. And there's different rules in regard to that. It's not really worth getting into in this conversation, but
Yeah.
there's some rules involved there. And flight instructor is really where most guys are gonna, in order to build enough hours to transition to the airlines, they get their flight instructor certificate. So that way they don't have to pay for all those flight hours. So they're out there actively instructing other pilots as they're building hours and working towards the minimum thresholds that they need to apply with a commercial airline. And then you've got, and then that's really it. Eventually that certificate for the airline is called an airline transport pilot license, an ATP. And that's, I think, ultimately what a lot of pilots strive for. But most pilots, they're just happy at like recreational flying, and that's all they want to do. Especially those that once they get beyond a certain age and they're not really looking to start a career in the airlines, they just,
Yeah.
they have an airplane and they want to go fly recreationally. They might stop at a private pilot license and that's all they get. The military training is a little bit different if you take that path, because there's the qualifications that you get in the military aren't necessarily FAA qualifications, but there's evaluations and check rides and things like that that you're going to do throughout your military training.
Yeah, so at one point you became Wing Chief of Safety, and that encompasses a lot of things at a base. Can you talk about that role and how that grew your interest in safety overall?
Sure. You know, I really didn't see myself having a leadership role when it comes to safety within the Air Force. When you're going through your normal career progression, and it just happened to be given that opportunity at the right time and the right moment. And the wing chief of safety is a position where you're responsible not just for aviation safety, but we also oversee occupational health safety, and then as well as munition safety. So all the weapons and the bombs, bullets on the base, things like that.
Yeah.
Now, it's not just me; it's a whole team of individuals, civilians, officers, and enlisted. And that gave me a very in-depth look at the safety investigation process. And I learned a lot about how the Air Force handles safety investigations. And really, growing up in a fighter community, safety is always first and foremost on your mind.
Sure.
But it really gave me a different lens into all of that, from the perspective of knowing that, hey, I'm the one that's going to be, somewhat responsible if we have some sort of major mishap here. So are we doing things safe, and are we doing things the right way? And is there a way we can make them better? Now, when I got out of the Air Force, I started, you see aviation mishaps in the news, right? So I started reading some of those stories, some of the reports, and a lot of times I was left wondering, well, where's the rest of the story here? There should be more to this investigation. And then I just started learning about how the NTSB handles that process and what their reports look like. And really, the channel that I have now, Pilot Debrief, is a culmination of, all of my experience as within safety and ending as wing chief of safety in the Air Force, combined with my experience as a fighter pilot and the debriefing methodology that we would use to learn as much as possible from every flight that we did. And so it's really just kind of marrying those two worlds together to create this channel where, you have a general aviation mishap, you look at the investigation documents, then you go through and you apply that debriefing methodology to really get to the root cause of what happened and why it happened.
Yeah. Now, Pilot Debrief is your brand, but it's also a thing, right? It's just a general thing that happens after a mishap or a situation, right?
Well,
You just
in
said.
the Air Force, we don't really call it pilot debrief. We just call it the debrief, and that's where I just kind of, I took the terminology because we have maintenance debrief, so the very first thing we do when we land is we go into maintenance debrief. Hey, how'd the jet fly today? You got any write-ups? And you log all your stuff from the flight and you talk to maintainers,
Yeah.
and then you head back into the squadron, and then that's for the pilots, and that's where and the backseaters, the Wizzos for the Strike Eagle. That's really where the learning begins. It's because now you're going to sit in a room for an hour to maybe 2 hours, and you're going to go over everything that happened during the flight to evaluate your mission objectives and determine, were we successful in meeting our objectives for today, and if not, why not? And let's figure out the root cause of that. So it's not necessarily a mishap debrief; it's root cause analysis, uh, evaluating against mission objectives. And I took that and applied that to, what the NTSB was doing. And a good example of this is when you look at an NTSB final report for an aircraft mishap, you might see the probable cause of the accident written as the pilot exceeded the critical angle of attack and stalled the aircraft and crashed. It's very simple terms. And you look at that and you go, okay, why? I get it. I understand he stalled and crashed, but how did, like, why?
Yeah.
Why did that happen? How did he get himself in that situation? And sometimes the answers are within that final report that they produce, but more often than not, there is a lot more information that tells that story and allows you to learn bigger lessons, and that's all buried within the docket of information that the NTSB has. And the docket is every document and every resource that they have that they put into that investigation is publicly available separately from that final report that you can review.
So do you just do a FOIA for each one, or do you even need to do that?
No, you don't need to do a FOIA. I mean, the NTSB is accountable, to the public, and so all that information is available to the public. There are things, if you want information faster, you can submit FOIA request. As an example, if there is a mishap and there's a lot of radio communication involved with that, you can submit a FOIA request to get access to the audio recordings from air traffic control and the communications back and forth with the pilot um, while the investigation is ongoing. But ultimately, when that investigation is complete, that should be included within the docket typically.
Okay. So that's interesting. I'm a former reporter, so that's why I was asking if it was available or if you had to try to get it, that kind of
I,
thing.
you know, I've only had to submit a FOIA request two times. And one of the times I submitted it, the incident had happened so long ago that, I could have basically, they kind of kept directing me to this archive office or that office. And I was just like, you know what, it's not worth it. It's okay. But the other time it was very simple, very easy. I submitted the request and got a response, pretty quickly. So.
Yeah, that's good. So tell me about the creation of your channel and how you decided, like you decided, okay, I'm gonna do this. I want to put the effort into it, and the response you got, initially, and how quickly it grew, things like that.
Sure. Well, I first got started in YouTube doing real estate videos. And that's because when I got out of the Air Force and the airlines weren't hiring, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I needed to generate some income. So I got my real estate license and then eventually got a mortgage license. And we weren't allowed to meet people in public to generate business. So
Yeah.
I thought, you know what? Why don't I start making some videos on YouTube? We'll see how that goes. And essentially, for about a 2 year period, I really learned a lot from YouTube and short form content that I was doing, both on LinkedIn and Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the different platforms, and just really learning a lot about how all that worked. The challenge that I had was I did not really like doing real estate. It wasn't very, my heart wasn't in it, definitely, but it was something that I needed to do at the time until the airlines started hiring again. And as I kept doing the real estate stuff, the one thing I did realize is I really enjoyed doing YouTube. I enjoyed being a content creator. So I knew I was going to make aviation content. I didn't know what type of content I was going to make. And that's when I started realizing, well, all this stuff about these investigations and these mishaps, maybe this is where it's at. I like talking about this stuff. I've got a background in it. And I started off on the channel really more looking at air traffic control communications. They had different, emergencies that had been recorded, and somebody else had made a YouTube video about it, but they didn't really explain anything. And that was frustrating to me because, like, well, it's great that you shared all the audio from what happened, but nobody's explaining the story behind it. So I started doing that. And then that kind of led me down the path of, all right, well, there's more than just the audio recordings. Let's dig into these investigations and start sharing that as well.
Yeah, I think that's how I got to know your channel. I must have watched one of those videos of black box recordings or something like that, and then
Mhm.
I came across yours, and I'm like, this isn't that. This is the actual story, like you said, the banking and lost power or whatever. This is the entire story behind it, and that's what's so satisfying about it. And you're very succinct at doing it, and so I give you props on that. I mean, I love watching your videos.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Um, of the videos, how long does it take you to do your research for, on average, for some of these videos?
It's tough to say because a lot of it depends on the complexity of the incident and the, what's included in the investigation. I would say on average, it takes about 4 to 5 days. Once I know which incident I'm going to make a video on to the time I actually have the video complete. And that's not working 8 hours a day every day. I mean, some days it is, but typically it's several hours a day over the course of 4 to 5 days, putting everything together, from the storyline to all the details to, making sure I have all my facts right. And then the resources that I use for the images and graphics in the videos and then editing and everything like that. The challenge I found is some of these investigations, I can spend sometimes up to 2 weeks working on a video off and on over the course of 2 weeks to try to get it done because it's just, so in depth. And a good example of that is the midair that happened at the Wings Over Dallas air show
Yeah.
in Texas. It was one of my early videos, and then I did a follow up video on it after I think the preliminary report came out from the NTSB. And the preliminary report on that investigation, there was over 2,000 pages of documents of interviews and transcripts and diagrams and things like that that I had to sort through. And that takes that takes a lot of time to read through because one of the things I really you know try to aim for is making sure everything that I say is 100% factually accurate. And I don't always hit that mark, but that's the standard that I try to hold myself to.
Yeah. Well, you do a good job. You do a very good job. So, it seems like you came out blasting. Like your first year, I think I heard you say that you did like 60 videos and 100 shorts or something like. Is that right? Or is that since your first year?
I don't know how many shorts I've done. I don't know if it's 100. I've made I think I've made over 100 long form videos now in the course of 2.5 years with the channel, but pretty much for about the first year and a half, I didn't miss a week, at least that I can remember. So I had a new video every single Sunday, for long form content. And those are videos that are, you know, on the shortest videos I think I have are maybe like 8.5 minutes long, but most of them are now running in the 15 to 18 minute range. Short form content, I did that for a while when I first started because that's what I knew how to do very well from the mortgage and real estate stuff. That's where I had the most success. And that's what really helped grow the channel initially. And I stopped making short form content probably about a year ago. Every now and then I might release something new on the short form content, but for the amount of work that goes into that, it's still a lot of work, and the payoff or the reward isn't necessarily worth the time invested in doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that we're in a world where we won't look away from our phones for 2 seconds, but here your short form is less valuable than long form. And here we are on a podcast that's long form. So it's just funny. There's a circle of everything, you know.
Well,
Uh,
you have to realize short form content is really for entertainment value. you
true.
know there's not a lot of educational short form content. It's very tough to develop a story in 60 seconds and provide all the details about an aviation mishap. And so the challenge that I've always had when trying to take the long form videos that I do now and convert them into a short form content, it's like, well, what part of the story do I tell, and what do I leave out to keep it in less than 60 seconds? And so trying to figure all that out is a lot of work. And that's why I've just, eventually decided, it's just not worth my time to try to figure this out. Because at the end of the day, those people, they're just there to watch it for a few seconds and then they move on to something else.
Especially when many of your videos, most involve the loss of life.
Mhm.
So last thing you're trying to do is dummy that down to a 60-second video, right?
Right, right. I found that I get a lot of comments on the short form about people trying to critique it or hey, why'd you cut it off and you didn't explain this? I'm like you realize this is a 60-second video that I could turn into a 20-minute story to cover all those details. And so, anyways, that's just some of the challenges of content creation.
Of the videos that you've done, what are some of the ones that you've had the most feedback on?
Mm, I think some of my early videos probably I got the most feedback directed at me specifically, because early on people didn't know who I was, and you see a guy on YouTube who's sitting in his living room, which I was at the time. I didn't have an office set up like I do now, and so you can tell here's a guy sitting in his living room talking about airplanes and mishaps, and like he's not wearing a pilot uniform. He doesn't say who he flies for. So there was some credibility questions from the audience initially, and also because I was covering general aviation mishaps, which I didn't have a lot of experience with as a pilot. All of my flight time predominantly was in the military and then transitioning to the airlines. So this recreational flying, general aviation is what guys refer to it as, was not something that I had an extensive background in doing. So I inevitably made a few mistakes early on, just from not understanding how that community works and flying and that in general aviation. So that's where I think I got the most feedback on my videos early on. But since then, it's I really don't get too much negative feedback every night. Mostly it's just people reaching out to thank me.
That's cool. I went on to Reddit and just searched pilot debrief, and I'll be honest,
Uh-oh.
all the comments were positive. I mean, everybody was describing your background. He goes into it in detail. He does his homework. So just thought I'd mention that to you. Uh,
No, I appreciate that. And people don't realize it, it took a while to get to that point, because the other issue I ran into early on was I got a lot of negative feedback from people about the titles for my videos and some of my thumbnails and things like that. I think people felt that it was clickbait,
right.
and without really understanding what clickbait is, because my goal has always been however I title this video, I'm going to deliver on that promise. So if I say, pilots arrogant mistakes get 52 people killed, well, you're going to hear a story about a pilot who is extremely arrogant, and and his arrogance is essentially what caused the deaths of everybody on that plane. And I think over time people started realizing, oh well, this isn't clickbait, it's just titled in a way that I'm not used to, and now they're used to it, and it's okay.
Now, do you have not relationships, but well, acquaintances, relationships? Do you know anybody at the NTSB or FAA, and have they ever given you feedback on what you do?
Not necessarily. I do know a couple people that have worked for the NTSB and have worked as safety investigators for aviation mishaps, and have done that for a good part of their careers, that have reached out to me just to say, hey, I appreciate what you did here and you got this right, or you might want to think about this. Just minor little pieces of feedback. A lot of times it's usually just offering help. It's, hey, if you ever have any questions about how the tower works or air traffic control procedures, this is my background. Feel free to reach out to me. That's usually what I end up hearing from.
Okay. The helicopter and commercial plane crash that happened
Mhm.
recently, they
Right.
had no information on normal broadcast other than this just happened, here's what's happening. So I checked your channel either same day or next day, and you had just great insight that I wish, like, I wanted to call NBC or CBS and say, "Hey, this this is a backstory." You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
uh, um, do you ever see yourself going beyond YouTube and contributing elsewhere as part of this?
I don't know. It's funny that you asked me that because I've never been approached by any reporters or news media organizations to provide, input or feedback or commentary on any sort of aviation mishap.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a messaging thing or what. And it's not, I'm not actively seeking the opportunities to do so.
Oh,
But I do find it odd because, like you, I watch the media, and when there's a plane crash or something involving aviation, I'll sit there and I'll shake my head listening to what some of the things the reporters are saying that don't have a background in aviation. And then eventually they'll get somebody on, that they can interview that does have the background to explain it. But initially when they're covering this stuff, I'm just like, you realize like you can just go on YouTube or there's places you can go and find people who would gladly share an opinion about this that have enough background to do so.
yeah, definitely. Well, maybe that's a thing to come. Who knows? Let me just change gears to stuff that's a little bit more uh, maybe unrealistic.
Okay.
How accurate are movies like Top Gun Maverick?
I thought Top Gun Maverick was very accurate. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Obviously they're going to embellish certain things, maneuverability of the aircraft, things like that. But they went to great lengths to try to portray it as accurate as possible in terms of some of the terminology they use when the pilots are flying, to how they, some of the exercises they do, to the tactics that they used for attacking the target at the end. So that was all very well done, in my opinion.
Okay. And then just in general, are there any other aviation related movies that are some of your favorites?
Oh, you know, there's a lot. I mean, honestly, for me growing up in the 80s, like Top Gun, the original Top Gun was where it was at, you
Yeah.
know, and I don't know if that necessarily was, the biggest inspiration for me going into aviation and the military, but it obviously, it played a role in shaping my career choices and path. So, I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Okay. Um, your call sign is Hoover, right?
Yes.
How did you get Hoover?
Well, the short story on that is when I finished training in the F-15E and went to my first operational squadron, a lot of my life support equipment, my G suit, my harness, things like that didn't fit me. And unbeknownst to me at the time, my gear had gotten swapped out with somebody else's on accident. So when I showed up at the squadron and I was doing my initial fit checks with the life support technician, and they're realizing like this gear is way too big, and they're asking me, well, how much weight did you lose, over the last 2 weeks? I'm like, I didn't really lose any weight, And so the guy started joking around with me. He said, well, sir, we might need to get you a girl's flight suit or a girl's G suit, because I don't know if we can get this one any smaller than what it is. And there was a female in the squadron who overheard this conversation. And in a fighter squadron, as long as 10% of the story is true, the entire story is true. So she went around telling every people like, "Hey, you guys know this new guy that just showed up? Do you know he's a cross dresser? Like, and he wears women's flight suits, and he's got women's flight gear and things like that." And at the time, this was during the "don't ask, don't tell" era of the military, and I get these strange looks in the hallway. And then, after a while, eventually somebody would be brave enough to come up to me and say, "Hey, I heard you wear chick flight suits. What's up with that?" you know, and I'm like, where are you guys hearing these rumors from? Like who told you that? And so that kind of, what was the background for the call sign. When you go to get your call sign after first couple months on the squadron, they're usually trying to find something that you've done in the aircraft, that you've messed up along the way that they can make fun of you for. And that's usually the, what they use to develop your call sign. And I hadn't really done anything crazy or messed anything up that big. but they had this really good story about everybody thought I was a closet cross-dresser, and the name that came to mind was J. Edgar Hoover,
I was just thinking
because
that. Yeah.
he was in that category, and so that's where Hoover came from.
Wow. Interesting. Well, along those lines, not J. Edgar, what are some of the best call signs that you've known from people that you've either flown with or just been in a squadron with?
I mean, I don't know. I think I've known so many guys with different call signs over the years. Honestly, the best call signs are the ones that have, the most embellished stories behind them, because remember, as long as 10% of the story is true, we can use that and work with it.
Yeah.
And so there's been some really great call signs over the years because of that. A lot of times it's, also a play on their last name, or it's an acronym for something, and I think in the naming ceremonies where everybody comes together and decides on the names for the new guys, you know, there's a lot of creativity that comes out of that. And there's just been, I don't know if I could pick one in particular, but there's been some really great ones over the years.
Now, one of the coolest videos that I watched you do was maybe 2 years ago, and it just shows to your character, to what kind of person you are. You admitted all the things I've ever done wrong in creating Pilot Debrief, and I
Mhm.
thought that was just very genuine of you to step up and say, "Hey, there's a couple times I've gone this way, I've zigged when I should have zagged," and um, the underlying premise of a lot of the video was that you really care about the families of the people that were involved, that the
Mhm.
extended family, that kind of thing. Can you
Right.
talk about that? How that's your focus when you make these videos?
Sure. When I first started making content on the channel, one of the things that I told myself was, when I put this video online for everybody to see, I've got to realize that a family member or a friend of the victim, it could end up watching this video.
Yeah.
And so every video that I make, I almost try to think about, is this something I would be comfortable saying to them if they were in the room with me? And if it's not, then I won't include it in the video. Now, the hard part about that, and I think this is where uh, the general aviation culture differs from the fighter pilot community, because in the fighter pilot community, you walk into that room to debrief your flight and you leave your ego at the door. Everybody, rank goes out the window, and we're really going to drill down. And it's not about, making the person feel bad. It's about the mistakes and getting to the root cause of the mistakes to make that person better. And in the general aviation community, there's not a lot of the debrief is essentially non-existent, for the most part. And so they're just not, I think people aren't used to that. And the challenge is to create a video where I'm essentially providing a debrief in a respectful manner, knowing that, the people that see that video may not understand the nuances of the fighter pilot community and the culture of the debrief, right? And so they view it sometimes more as an attack on the person rather than it is, an examination of what went right and what went wrong during a mishap.
Now, when you're flying commercial, are you going overseas or domestic, or what's the bulk of what you're doing today?
I've done both, but mostly now it's international.
Okay. And well, I guess that's all I wanted to ask about that. So as Pilot Debrief continues to grow, now I know
Mhm.
you have people can subscribe and follow, but then you have another layer where people can support. What do those followers receive? And I know you don't seek them out, so I'm
Right.
not asking, but since it does exist, what do those hardcore fans get for supporting you in any sort of way?
That's a great question. As you said, I don't actively ask for this on my channel. If people want to support me, they can. There's a couple options through YouTube. There's YouTube channel memberships, and there's different levels for that. So, I think it's at $1.99 a month. It's basically just your way of saying thanks.
Right.
And the biggest, really, the benefit that you get out of that is when I do my live streams, and also when you comment on a video, you're going to have a different badge next to your name. So I'm going to know, first of all, that you're a member, but then those badges change after a certain number of months. So I also know how long you've been a member. And what that allows me to do is prioritize my responses to comments and things like that, or recognize people in live stream chat. And then, you get all those same things with the higher levels too, but the other benefits are at the higher levels, you get early access to the videos. So I release the videos on Sunday to the public, but I might release them on a Thursday or Friday to members at certain levels of membership. And I really enjoy that because now I get several hundred people, potentially looking at that video before everybody else. And they get the opportunity to directly engage with me in the comments because I know all the comments are coming from just the members that saw it. So they're the first to see it, the first to discuss it, and have that interaction back and forth with me. And now I'm in the process of actually starting to create additional content, which is just members only videos. And I've only done one or two of those, but that's something that I'm trying to work on more in the future. And then finally, like at the higher levels, we do it was scheduled to be a quarterly Zoom call, but I'm going to start doing that on a monthly basis after the success that we had last month. So we just kind of get together on a Zoom call for however long we need to and just hang out, and they can ask me questions. We can chat back and forth. So that's a lot of fun, really. It's just kind of interacting with everybody.
Yeah, I'm gonna write this down real quick. Now, yeah, that open Q&A is always fun. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
For somebody who's already a fan, if you will.
Right.
Do you ever get recognized? Do people do you?
I do, but it's only when I wear the hat. It's funny how people won't recognize me. Like I've been on trips for work where I might be flying with the same guys for 3 or 4 days, and after on that fourth day, they might say, "Oh, I knew you from somewhere. Like I just saw this video last night, like in the hotel room, and then they'll mention it to me the next day." Because I'm not wearing the hat, and I'm usually not wearing my pilot debrief shirt out in town either. But
Right.
but I now I end up, I wear my hat a lot when I'm at home, and so I'll get recognized at the grocery store and places like that from time to time. So it's always kind of entertaining.
Yeah, that's cool. Will some of your content you think ever be, on site, like in a jet or in a hangar, or whether it's for a live stream or whatever?
Well, I can't do any of that content with my current employer. So that's one of the challenges that I have. But I am exploring possibilities of doing some of that type of content in the future. And in fact, one of the members only videos I have, I threw it up on the channel for the members just because I was like, I don't know if they'll be interested in this or not. I went flying in a Cirrus probably about several weeks ago, and I it's like, oh, I'll take some cameras with me and throw the video up there and see if people like it. And it's not the type of content I would create for the Pilot Debrief channel
Right.
because that's a very different type of content. But I think it's fun, kind of for the members only, to share some of that every now and then.
What kind of content relating to aviation do you like to watch?
I like learning about different aircraft. And there's a couple different channels that I watch, not for necessarily the come fly with me portion of it, but just to kind of just kick back and relax and see what's going on. There's several different channels that I watch just to see what they're doing and see, learn a little bit more about the types of aircraft that they're flying. Those are fun to me. I also like the videos about military aircraft, getting to kind of see behind the scenes just because I kind of already know a lot of that. So I want to see what someone else is going to say about that. And so that's interesting to me too.
Can you send me some of those on email and then
Sure.
we upload the podcast? I'll put down some of Hoover's links for anyone to click on. Okay. Hey, well, that's all I had for today. I really appreciate your time. Again, I love your channel. That's the number one reason I reached out to you is because I watch you all the time. So keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job, and it's very interesting. And look forward to every next video.
Yeah, thanks so much. And if people want to go beyond the YouTube channel, I've really revamped my website recently to the point where if you want to learn more about aviation mishaps, I'm posting usually 3 or 4 aviation mishaps a week on there. And those aren't videos, but it's a blog style format with a free newsletter. So if you're looking to improve your safety awareness and learn from the mistakes of others, it's I'm really trying to make it a valuable resource for pilots out there to learn from.
Sure. I'll make sure that's the first link. So, hey, thanks,
Awesome.
Hoover.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you
Ed. I
very
appreciate
much.
it.
You have a great day.
All right, you too. Take care.
Bye.